Keeping the family home after a divorce might feel like the one piece of stability in a life that suddenly turned upside down. You've already lost a marriage, adjusted to a new routine, and possibly watched your kids go through their own emotional roller coaster. So staying in the house, the place where memories live, where the pictures still hang, and where the floors creak just the way you remember, it feels like the safe choice. The obvious choice. But here's what most people don't realize. That home? It comes with strings. Financial strings. Legal strings. Emotional strings that can quietly turn into knots, and if you're not careful, you might spend years trying to untangle them. Because keeping the house isn't just about staying put. It's about ownership. Mortgages. Taxes. Equity. Deadlines. Responsibilities that don't get easier just because you're familiar with the wallpaper. And once the ink dries on your divorce agreement, some of those decisions can't be undone. In this video, we're going to walk through 6 things you must review and fully understand before you agree to keep the family home. These aren't minor details. They're the exact things people wish they had asked about after it's already too late. Things that cost them money, peace of mind, even their credit scores. All because they didn't realize what they were really signing up for. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll have a clearer picture of what you're keeping and what you might accidentally be giving up. Let's get into it. The biggest mistake people make when keeping the house is assuming that just because the divorce agreement says it's theirs, the mortgage is no longer their ex's problem, or worse, no longer their problem. But here's the truth no one tells you until it's too late. A divorce decree does not override a mortgage contract. Let me say that again. Just because your divorce agreement says you're keeping the house, that doesn't mean your ex is automatically off the hook. And it doesn't mean you are, either. If both your names are on the mortgage and you don't refinance, the bank still sees both of you as responsible. That means if you fall behind on payments, it's not just your credit on the line, it's theirs too. And if your ex gets hit with financial penalties or credit damage because of it, don't be surprised when you get a call, a lawsuit, or worse, a court motion to force the sale of the house you thought was yours. And then there's the emotional landmine. Some people think keeping the house will bring peace. But every monthly reminder of a joint mortgage tied to an ex you no longer speak to? That doesn't feel like closure. It feels like a ticking time bomb. If you're keeping the home, you need to refinance. Period. Remove your ex's name from the loan and put the full responsibility on yourself, or get a cosigner you trust. Yes, it takes time. Yes, it might be financially hard. But leaving both names on the mortgage is like keeping one foot in a marriage that's already ended. And here's the scary part. If your ex declares bankruptcy or goes into debt and your name is still tied to that mortgage, creditors can come knocking on your door. So ask yourself right now, does your divorce agreement mention the mortgage in detail? Does it explain who's responsible and what happens if payments are missed? Because this isn't just paperwork. This is your financial future. And if that sounds heavy, just wait until you hear what happens if the house gains value and you didn't secure your equity rights in writing. Let's talk about that next. You might think that because the divorce agreement says the house is yours, the equity, the value you've built over the years, is protected. But here's a reality few people realize until it's too late. Equity doesn't just transfer because someone moves out. It has to be legally claimed. And if that equity wasn't clearly addressed in the agreement, you could find yourself facing a very expensive surprise. Let's say the home is worth $500,000. You still owe $300,000 on the mortgage. That leaves $200,000 in equity. But how much of that is actually yours? Half. All. What if your ex paid for renovations, or put in a lump sum to pay down the principal years ago? What if the agreement was vague, or worse, silent, about who gets what? Now fast forward 5 years. The home value goes up. You decide to sell. Suddenly, your ex shows up with paperwork, claiming they're still entitled to a portion of the equity. And depending on how your divorce was written, they might be right. And even if you never sell, they could place a lien on the house. They could demand a buyout. They could even take you back to court, arguing that the division was never finalized correctly. You'd be shocked how many people have their ownership challenged years after thinking everything was settled. And here's where it gets even trickier. If you refinanced after the divorce but never settled the equity split in writing, the refinancing doesn't protect you from future claims. In fact, it might strengthen their case, especially if they argue that you locked them out of their share unfairly. So what can you do? Your divorce agreement should have a clear, specific breakdown of who owns what portion of the equity, down to the dollar. It should spell out what happens if the home is sold, rented, refinanced, or improved. It should include whether one person is buying out the other, and at what valuation, appraisal at the time of divorce, or in the future. Because if that isn't spelled out, it leaves the door wide open for confusion and conflict. Keeping the house is one thing. Keeping the value in that house? That's something entirely different. And if that sounds like a headache, just wait until we talk about what happens when property taxes, repairs, and insurance pile up, and your name's the only one left holding the bag. Let's go there next. Everyone talks about keeping the house like it's a prize. But what they don't talk about is what happens after the ink dries, when all the shared responsibilities suddenly land on just your shoulders. And unless your divorce agreement spelled it out clearly, those hidden costs? They'll come out of your pocket. Let's break it down. Property taxes, homeowner's insurance, roof repairs, HVAC replacements, plumbing surprises, lawn maintenance. Things that used to be split are now entirely yours. And if your agreement didn't require your ex to continue contributing financially, you may have agreed to carry a weight you weren't prepared for. There's also the issue of deferred maintenance. During the marriage, maybe neither of you tackled that old water heater or those hairline cracks in the foundation. But now, you're the sole owner, and those repairs are your legal responsibility. If the house needs $15,000 in updates just to stay livable, guess who's on the hook? And it's not just the physical house. It's the insurance premiums that spike once your ex's name is removed. It's the higher utility costs if your ex handled half the bills. It's unexpected assessments from the HOA. And if you took on the home to keep things stable for your kids, you might find that the emotional security comes with a brutal financial toll. Too many people walk away from divorce thinking they won the house, only to find themselves drowning in bills 6 months later. And by then, the mortgage is in their name, the ex is gone, and the divorce is final. There's no one left to share the cost, or the blame. Here's the bottom line. Your divorce agreement should include a breakdown of all anticipated and ongoing home-related expenses, and who pays what. It should clarify what happens if a major repair is needed. It should name who's responsible for taxes, insurance, and surprise costs. And if it doesn't, you're walking into a money pit you didn't ask for. And if that feels like enough pressure, wait until we talk about what happens when one of you wants to sell, and the other refuses to let go. Let's talk about that next. It sounds simple. I'm keeping the house. But what happens when that changes? Maybe 5 years down the line, your income dips. Property taxes go up. The market surges, and selling suddenly makes financial sense. You decide it's time to let go. But there's a problem. Your ex is still tied to the property. Maybe their name is still on the deed or mortgage. Maybe your divorce agreement didn't clearly define what would happen if you chose to sell. And now, just when you thought you'd move forward, you're stuck waiting for permission. This happens more often than you'd think. One spouse keeps the house, but the title remains in both names. Why? Sometimes to avoid refinancing. Sometimes to dodge taxes. Sometimes just because no one thought to change it. And at first, it's fine. Until one person wants out, and the other won't agree. You could be ready to sell, but they refuse to sign. Or worse, they ghost you, delay decisions, or suddenly demand a portion of the profits you thought were already yours. And if your agreement didn't include a buyout timeline, a forced sale clause, or a dispute resolution plan, you could be legally paralyzed. That house you once fought to keep? It becomes a trap. There are even cases where one ex-spouse moved out years ago, didn't pay a cent toward the home, and still walked away with thousands when the house was finally sold, because the paperwork never said they couldn't. This is why your divorce agreement must include a clear exit strategy. What happens if you decide to sell? Does your ex have any say? Are they owed equity? How is that equity calculated? Based on current market value or the value at the time of the divorce? Who pays for agent fees, closing costs, repairs? If you don't know the answer to those questions, you're not protected. So before you breathe a sigh of relief that you got the house, ask yourself this: if something goes wrong, do I actually have the power to walk away? Because up next, we're diving into a problem that can blindside even the most prepared homeowners. The nightmare of refinancing in your own name, and why it's not as simple as people think. Let's get into that now. Here's a question that catches more people off guard than you'd expect. Are you sure you can refinance the house in your own name? Because unless your divorce agreement includes a clear plan for refinancing, and more importantly, a deadline, it can create years of unexpected financial fallout. Let's say your ex agrees to give you the house. It sounds final. It feels fair. But if the mortgage is still in both of your names, the bank doesn't care what your divorce decree says. They care about one thing: who's listed on the loan. And if your name is the only one on the title but the mortgage is still joint, you're living in a financial limbo. If you miss a payment, it hits both of your credit scores. If you want to refinance but your income alone isn't strong enough, the bank says no. And if your ex applies for a loan somewhere else, your shared mortgage could hurt their debt-to-income ratio, sparking a legal dispute you didn't see coming. Worse, some people go years thinking everything's fine, until one of them tries to sell, and the lender refuses because the ownership and the debt no longer match. Or worse, the house ends up in foreclosure because one person assumed the other was making payments. And here's where it gets tricky. Refinancing is not guaranteed. Divorce doesn't automatically grant you the ability to qualify on your own. If your credit score is shaky, your debt is high, or your income is unstable, you might not be able to refinance at all. That means you're stuck with a house you legally own, but can't truly claim. That's why a strong divorce agreement needs to include specific terms. When refinancing must happen, what happens if it doesn't, and how any equity will be handled. Some agreements include a clause that says, if refinancing isn't completed within 6 months, the house must be sold. It may sound harsh, but it's often the only way to prevent years of financial entanglement. Because here's the truth. Just because you're no longer married doesn't mean your finances are cleanly split. If your ex is still on your mortgage, or you're still on theirs, you're tied together in a way that can affect loans, taxes, even credit for years to come. So if you're keeping the house, ask yourself, can I actually refinance it in my name alone? And if not, what's the plan? Because in the next section, we're going to talk about one of the biggest risks people overlook when they're emotionally attached to the family home. And it's the one that can quietly destroy your financial future. Let's talk about that now. Let's be honest. Keeping the house isn't always a financial decision. Sometimes, it's emotional. You walk past the staircase where your kids took their first steps. You stand in the kitchen where family holidays played out. And in those quiet moments, it feels like selling the house would mean letting go of a life you're still trying to hold on to. But here's what no one tells you in the middle of a divorce. Emotional attachment can quietly bankrupt you. You might feel strong staying in the home. But if the numbers don't make sense, that sense of stability can come at a very high price. Maybe you're now living on one income, but still carrying a mortgage designed for two. Maybe the house needs repairs that your budget can't stretch for. Or maybe your property taxes are creeping up each year, and draining your savings without you realizing it. Some people stretch themselves so thin just to keep the house, that they have nothing left over. No retirement savings. No emergency fund. No breathing room. And it doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow, silent drift into financial stress, until one day, you're staring at bills you can't pay, in a house you no longer feel safe in. And still people hang on. Because, it's the only home my kids have ever known. Or, I just need to make it work until I can afford to sell. But months turn into years, and by then, the damage is done. Here's what you need to ask yourself. Is this house supporting your future? Or trapping you in your past? Because if the home is no longer affordable, or requires sacrifices that bleed into every other part of your life, it may not be the safe harbor it once was. And here's the hard truth. Sometimes the best way to move forward is to let go of the thing you thought would keep you grounded. That doesn't mean your memories disappear. It doesn't erase the life you built. But it does give you the freedom to rebuild on solid ground. Financially, emotionally, and mentally. If you're feeling overwhelmed or torn, you're not alone. So many people assume keeping the home is the strong choice, when in reality, it becomes the silent weight they carry. And that brings us to the final thought. Because everything we've discussed leads to one powerful, overlooked truth. Let's wrap this up. Here's a twist that catches people completely off guard. What if your ex stops paying a bill you both agreed to in the divorce? You might assume that because your divorce agreement clearly states who's responsible for what, you're protected. But that's not always how the real world works. Let's say the mortgage is still in both your names, but your ex agreed to pay it for a certain period. Maybe until the kids graduate or the house is refinanced. Sounds simple, right? But if your ex falls behind, guess whose credit gets hit? Yours. Because to the lender, your divorce agreement doesn't matter. If your name is on the loan, you're still legally on the hook. And it's not just the mortgage. Think about property taxes, insurance, HOA dues, even utility bills. If any of those are tied to your name and they go unpaid, it's your financial reputation that takes the hit. And worse, the penalties can come quietly. You may not even realize there's a missed payment until a collections notice shows up, or your credit score drops, or you're denied a future loan. This is why it's critical, to build safeguards into your agreement. That could mean setting clear timelines for refinancing, requiring proof of payment on shared debts, or even including a clause that forces the sale of the home if obligations aren't met. Because trust may have been part of your marriage, but after divorce, accountability is what protects your future. So ask yourself, if your ex slips up, what's your backup plan? Is your name still exposed? Are there consequences written into the agreement that actually protect you? Because if not, you could be walking into a financial trap you didn't even know was set. And this leads us to the final question most people never ask, until it's too late. Let's wrap everything up. So now you know, keeping the family home after divorce isn't just about where you sleep at night. It's about legal responsibility, financial risk, and long-term peace of mind. You've seen how one overlooked clause can lead to surprise debt, how a delayed refinance can drag your credit down, how joint ownership without safeguards can tie you to someone you thought you'd already moved on from. And that's the part no one warns you about. Everyone tells you to fight for the house. But they don't tell you what it takes to keep it safely. They don't tell you that holding on to the home can sometimes mean holding on to legal ties, emotional baggage, and years of unexpected bills. Unless you get every detail in writing, and every risk accounted for. That's why now is the time to go back and review your agreement with fresh eyes. Not just the big picture stuff, but the fine print. Who pays for what? What happens if someone stops paying? What's the plan for selling later on, or refinancing when things change? Because once the divorce is finalized, those documents become your new rulebook. And if something's missing or vague, there may not be a second chance to fix it. If you've made it this far, you're already doing more than most. You're asking the hard questions now, before they turn into regrets. And that's the smartest move you can make. So if this video helped you see your situation differently, let us know in the comments. Share one change you're planning to make, or one detail you're going to double-check in your agreement. Your experience might just help someone else avoid a costly mistake. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. We make videos to empower you with the truth most people don't hear until it's too late. So hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and take care of your future. It's worth protecting.